Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Center Stage and this year's final Water in Communications. The Water in Communications program is made possible with the support of the Grundfos Foundation. Please meet the Grundfos Foundation outside in booth 403, where there will be a mingle after this session. They also support the stories from Tanzania at the back of Center Stage. Please take the time to look at those too. Today, we're here to talk science, communication, and AI, threats, challenges, opportunities. The World Economic Forum has identified AI mis- and disinformation as the largest threat after climate change. What I also want to talk about today is the opportunities this evolving technology can give us for people in terms of removing bias, creating greater inclusion, and stronger agency for all stakeholders. Joining me on stage to discuss this, I'm very happy to have Aleksis Pirinen, Senior AI Researcher with a focus on climate change at RISE, Marcus Lundstedt, Head of Communications at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, Mulumba Jane Nabunnya, Country Director IRC, Uganda. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks.
Marcus, I'm going to start with you. With the advent of the AI tools that we have access to, like Runway, like Zal, like Synthesia, this potential for deep fakes, for misinformation, is significantly increasing. From your perspective, what are the opportunities and how can we work with these tools and this new information, this evolving tech, to integrate AI into our community and the water community to actually allow for a way forward?
Well, there are huge opportunities, obviously. We have all tested ChatGPT, and I actually worked with ChatGPT to ask that very question, because you sent it in advance to me. So I'm just going to repeat back what AI said. I mean, that's the answer coming out of tens of thousands of experience. So basically, they said it can boost quality of the communications with more data. It can be more efficient, so we can save time and money, which is important as well, resources. And we'll spend less time on gathering data and spend more time on analyzing it, so we can actually use it. It also proposed, and I can say that we have already tested this at Stockholm Resilience Centre, to create communications material, like a first draft of a news story or something, or make sure that we do a review of a certain amount of data. So those are good things. Those are the opportunities. But do you want me to carry on?
I do, and I actually hear where you're going with this, and that's a question I was going to follow up with.
Well, obviously, I also then asked ChatGPT, well, are there any risks? And the amount of answers I got when it comes to opportunities were like, 4 or 5 bullet points, but then at the risk, it just kept on prompting. It was just like an avalanche of information. And I think that signals that there's a high degree of uncertainty and risk when implementing AI in our communications work. And I can sense that in so many ways as well. I mean, I can start with the fact that our research shows, there's a report on our website, Climate Misinformation in a Time of Misinformation. You can Google it, you can find it, where it's saying with automated bots, with generative AI, it's going to be, and it is already so easy to create persuasive climate misinformation. It's hard to tell whether this is right or wrong. And obviously, that's a huge risk for us in communications, because it all comes down to trust, right? Do we actually believe that this is true? And especially when it comes to the science community, I mean, that's all we have. We need to make sure that whatever is coming out, and we call it science, is true. So that's obviously huge amounts of risks. And we also know that when we are creating solutions to problems, because AI, they're creating a lot of solutions, right? Our research on transformation also shows whenever you create a solution, you also create new problems. So you need to be risk aware of that. So what is the new problem we're creating here? And can we find a way already to think about how we would solve that? So those are some of the things that we want to do.
And of course, ChatGPT and generative AI is very self-aware, and that's a positive thing, because they understand that, hey, we're part of the problem here. Be cautious, be aware. But when it comes, you talk about data, you talk about analysis, and how generative AI can help us with communication, can be a huge ally in communication. Of course, these first drafts that you talked about, we touched upon it on stage, they're really good. We can actually work, it saves a lot of time. It gets us moving faster. when it comes to machine learning, when it comes to modeling, of course, AI becomes a huge tool that's optimistic and future-looking as well. Aleksis, you're working with modeling, you're working with machine learning, and AI has been something that you've leaned on quite a lot when it comes to climate. Tell us more about this and also compare it, just for us to all understand. How has this been different to what you've done before when it comes to more analog development?
Yes, that's right. So within our research group at RISE, we are quite broadly working with AI systems and solutions for various environmental and climate problems. Examples can include using AI to better understand satellite imagery or time series of satellite data that can be used, for example, to analyze coastal changes following from climate change or deforestation or socioeconomic developments even in urban areas. We've also been working with water flow intensity modeling in Swedish catchment areas, where the purpose is to understand how water flow changes based on the characteristics of a catchment area, past rainfall and temperature variations, and so on, which can subsequently be used to better understand climate adaptation efforts. So those are some examples within the group. And you also asked about the difference between this new paradigm of using AI versus traditional approaches. Well, there are some obvious or important changes that I see. One big thing is that AI and data-driven solutions allow us to scale up things in a much bigger way. So when you look at, for example, analyzing ecosystems, as I understand it, traditionally you would have to have field experts that need to, for example, measure certain properties, tree heights, tree widths, and whatever it may be, to understand your environment. And these types of data can then be used by AI to predict similar properties in larger areas or even other areas, which of course enables us to get a better, bigger picture of things, for example.
So you use the same trends to help you with the modeling to make assumptions based on the evidence that you have that this tree width in, let's say, Stockholm, looking at trees in Gothenburg, same tree, let's make some modeling assumptions and let's use AI to do that. Okay, Jane, I'm going to come to you next. You're working with trust, you're working with modeling, you're working with field workers. Tell us about your work and the trust building you need to do to get the information that you need on an everyday basis.
Just listening to the two, I'm not even so sure where to start from. In the part of the world where I come from, where most of the things are still, we even get excited just getting a smartphone. And you have a smartphone, but you also struggle a little bit to get the data, to buy the credit, and the internet is not there. It's not stable. But we know about AI. It's not that we don't know about it. We know that there are good things out there that can really enable us to do many, many good things. It's a process to build trust, and especially trust that is connected to a very sensitive issue like water.
Jane, before we come to that, I actually want to ask you, when you say we know about AI, of course, it can be very helpful. I'm going to push you a little bit on this. Jane knows where I'm going with this. Because we had a very open conversation.
Yes.
When we were talking about this panel. And you said a few things that I think need to be said here. When you say, of course, AI, how do you feel about this conversation that's happening here in terms of the way in which we're moving and the discussions of modeling and the discussions of communication?
I feel good because I know about it. But I also feel bad because I know that the people that I work with in my districts have no idea what is happening. My district water officers who don't even have a laptop and probably don't have a smartphone, and they probably don't have electricity. And so you can talk about internet, so you can talk about AI. Where I sit in Kampala, I know that I engage with the sector, and the sector has grown, and it has all these things. I know that I engage with a big utility like National Water and Sewage Corporation, that probably has the best billing apps in the region, in terms of billing, in terms of customer relations. But I still go back to my district water officer who is struggling. Struggles to even send a message, struggles to be connected. So even if you come and say, you know, AI is beautiful, it is jumping up and down, you have to really convince that person that it is a very good technology and it can help you to do many things. It can help you to manage your data. It can help you to tell your impact stories. It can generate answers for you. And that one, the person will understand, but will also say, but you say, I don't even have a desktop. How do I do that? And so we try in the work that we do to expose those people, bring them to the Water Resources Institute of the ministry, or take the Water Resources Institute there, where they will even wonder at small things like, oh, the internet is fast. That alone is a statement to tell you that don't even go where AI is supposed to be. And so I'm not saying that we don't know. The awareness is there. What I'm saying is that we are a little bit far behind in terms of picking up all these pieces and making good use of them. We have a whole ministry, for example, in charge of information and technology. We have a whole agency, a whole authority that deals with technology issues and information and data processing. And that's at the national level. In the Ministry of Water and Environment, we have management information systems that use up-to-date apps, really, to do the data analysis, the data collection, but in a way, we are also stuck in analog. You have to fill Form A, and Form B, and Form E, and that is then put into by some people seated behind desks, and then it takes long to do the analysis. It takes long to get the forms from up north. But we know that there is that gap, and I think that's where the pain comes from, that we know that there are good things, and we could use a little bit more of, get more resources in that area. Even things like, simple things like, let's look at X, for example, Twitter. There are many protocols one has to go through, for example, from a government point of view, to put any message on the X platform.
So Jen, I'm going to stop you there because protocols, is that discussion we can come to, but I think what you said, I want to come back to Marcus, I want to come back to Aleksis, because of course, we're here at the World Water Week to have inclusive dialogue.
Yes.
We're here to talk about stakeholders, agency, access, representation, using technology and the tools we need to access to make this conversation happen. Now, you've heard Jane's story from Uganda, and she's saying, I get it, I'm a part of an international conversation. I want to understand how to use this. At the same time, I'm having trouble sending an SMS. With the conversations that you're part of, how does this resonate with you? What do you need to be aware of as you move forward in the conversations that you're having when you're pushing the AI modeling, the AI usage, and where it should go? Marcus, I'm going to start with you. Aleksis, I'm going to come to you next.
It's a great question, and yeah, I don't have a 2-minute answer to that question, but I can start with the fact that I was a development cooperation worker for some 10 years, working for an organization called We Effect, based and had organizations in partnership in Uganda. And what you're sharing, I've heard many times before, and I was based myself in Vietnam. And there's always this belief when there's a new technology on the horizon that that's going to solve our problems. But very often it's more instrumental things like the access to education or having, you know, a decent income that is actually inflicting so many injustices in the world. So I don't think we should see AI as that silver bullet that's going to solve these huge human problems. It's much more about actually trying to solve this from one human to another. It's the very same conversation we're seeing now in the climate community with carbon capture, where we think that, well, our super high emissions and our putting the pressure on the planet is going to be solved by, you know, drilling a hole in Earth. Well, that may be a part of the solution, but it's not saying anything about the actual root cause of the problem, and that needs to be dealt with humans. So I think in this conversations of AI, it's really signaling back to us humans, we need to spend more time together as human beings and shape long-term relationships, partnerships, and build, like you said, trust. Because if we don't have trust in each other, we're never going to convey data or information that is actually credible and then can help us guide our decision making. So something that I mean, just in the past year after COVID, really tried to make use of is building communities, making sure that we have inclusive conversations. And rather than only saying science says or informing what we do, ask more questions.
So just for the audience to know, this is a question that was not in the script. This is not ChatGPT talking, just so it's important they know this. Because it's a great response. It's a systemic problem. And this conversation puts another layer to what the systemic problem is and how we go back to filling those gaps, addressing those questions, policy, education, also budgets. And you touch upon budgets in terms of the work you're going. Where are the budgets? Where's the money being spent? Aleksis.
Yeah, I resonate with a lot what Mulumba Jane says. I do research in high tech. AI is one of the most sort of high tech things out there right now, but I'm actually a low tech enthusiast. And what I mean by this is, and has been said by both speakers already, is that when we create new technologies, we also create new problems. We don't always need the most latest, most energy consuming technology to solve issues. So I've been trying to advocate something that I even call high tech for low tech. And what do I mean by this? Well, I would like us to use the technologies that we have, or at least some of us have. Some of us have access to resilient energy grids and so on. Let's use these AI tools to better enable lower tech solutions where said AI systems may not be as functional. So that can be, for example, to use AI to predict where are nature-based solutions most likely to have the most beneficial downstream effects. And then we implement these downstream lower tech solutions that are more resilient and so on. That is one way I think we can bridge these kinds of gaps, at least.
Then I'll come back to you, Jane, when you're talking about creating the best fit when it comes to AI, the best fit when it comes to technology, what works best for you and for your stakeholders. Now, you touched upon this before I told you to shift the discussion, how to build trust when it comes to new technologies at the work that you do and the stakeholders you work with. When Aleksis talks about we see opportunities, there are ways to operationalize this conversation, what would you need to do to make this conversation active?
I think the first thing is to be open about it. Sharing the benefits, but also sharing the challenges about AI. Tell it as it is. At one point, AI will take away the jobs. And people don't have to, don't have to have all the people in a factory or even at a pump station because buttons will only be pressed and things will happen. And that's the first place for trust. Being open about it, sharing the technologies and the details about those technologies. Are the technologies going to dig deep into our lives and find out the name of my great-great-grandmother and where she's buried? And because those are the sensitive things. We went through recently registration for national identity cards, and they were asking the deep questions. So everybody now feels that we are naked out there, like everybody knows about you. You have a small box somewhere in some technology place, and they know your name, your grandmother, the salary you get, where you stay, what, do you have a TV, you don't have a TV, do you have a fridge, you don't have a fridge. So those details make people feel very insecure. But put it there and talk about it and say, this will help us to do this, but it also has these negative aspects. And then the other part, these things around AI need policies and strategies. I need to feel and see my government taking the lead in protecting my data. You know, because when people feel that when I go to the hospital and I give all these and they diagnose me and I have this disease, somebody can just click somewhere and get all this information, that increases insecurity. People don't want that. But they also need to know that AI can do so many things with health, diagnosis, analysis, ask
ChatGPT.
Yes, and then it will tell you, yeah, it worked in Cambodia, it worked in Vietnam, it worked here. There are examples out there that we can tap into very fast. But those policies need to really come from government. Rwanda is doing that very well. Mauritius is doing that extremely well. They've put it out there. There are policies on AI that are very clear, and people can access them. People can ask questions. People also need to feel that at the local level, local communities, local people can still be part of the decision-making processes, even if there are technologies involved. You know, when we go back like to the sector that I work in, the water sector, if you're just going to use something small like a drone or linked up to some satellite, GIS, GPS, you explain these things slowly to the local government. Not in a very quick way, that slowly. Because at that level, it's the local government in charge. You won't come flying your drones all over the place that you are looking for water, you are sighting, you are doing this. No. It is the way you also engage at that level and communicate properly and openly, and you'll draw the local government, the leadership on board, and then the communities will also come on.
I mean, I think, Jane, what you say is not something that's limited to the conversations with your stakeholders. There are similar conversations happening here in terms of how do we remove the fear from this discussion? How do we remove the fear of the what ifs? And transparency, trust, and of course, information becomes critical. But then, Marcus, I want to come to you, building on what Jane is saying. Of course, when you take the conversation forward, you have the issue of modeling. You have the issue, of course, with the information being collected and being developed. And then we come into one of the questions of AI in terms of bias, in terms of, I want to trust, I want to understand the new tech, but I want to see myself in the conversation. I'm not seeing myself in the conversation. And there is a number of discussions now, of course, with the AI policy coming out to say, how do we shift the bias? How do we create a level playing field when it comes to modeling? In terms of the conversations you're having, how do you work with the threat of bias with AI development?
I have to be honest to say that it's still a question that remains to be unanswered. We are looking at it in so many different ways. What the research has shown is obviously that we are reinforcing the negative structures very much with AI, and we're seeing that when it comes to climate misinformation, it's being used by interests that want to stop any new transformations away from a fossil dependency. So obviously we are seeing that they are making huge wins online when it comes to creating the narrative around what do we actually need to do. And there's creating a lot of noise as well around what's available in terms of information, and creating a lot of doubt in what is actually needed to do things. And I think that's also creating even greater imbalance, because if we're talking about enabling the voice of Global South or a partner organization in Kampala, say a farmer, without the access to this technology, obviously that farmer is going to be even more anonymous in that conversation because they don't have access to that technology. So that's yeah, creating an even bigger problem. So I totally agree with you, Mulumba, that I think we need to have joint protocols and policies in place fast. I mean, there are the guidebook, there are the rules for how we're actually going to work with this. I mean, in any game we play, in any development, we need to have joint rules. And before we shape them, we need to address all communities that are affected by it and ask questions. So how would you affect this? How do you think we should work with this? Rather than with a top-down approach, where we're just creating a solution to something that we think is a problem. Because in the end, then, we're not actually solving anything. We're just creating a new problem. So I think we'd be really, really risk-aware about that, how we can reinforce these power balances even more with tech and try to go beyond that. And hopefully find a way, very much like we have found a way with internet being a friend of ours, right? It can be a huge threat as well. Making sure that AI becomes our friend in that development rather than a foe.
And especially when it comes to conversations we're having here, when it comes to the environment, when it comes to water-related risks, that we can actually see how do we mobilize this toolkit. And Aleksis, you're working with this right now in terms of resource-constrained environments where water is scarce, modeling to see how can we apply AI. And what are the futures, what's the next steps when it comes to that, and how do you get the data?
Well, yes, there are scarcity both in terms of data, but also resources, energy, and so on. So I see a lot of different important directions moving forward from also a technical point of view. Like we need to move away from just very large-scale AI systems. ChatGPT has been mentioned a lot, but that's a very huge generalist AI model. And I think in many times we can use much simpler solutions requiring less energy. As for data, it is a big problem that depending on where you are in the world, you have very different access to certain types of data for whatever you might want to do. Different types of environmental analysis, for example. But there is also a research avenue that tries to tackle specifically this, assuming that you want to train an AI system in one part of the world. How do I ensure that this model actually generalizes to another continent, for example? And that also includes, as has been said, of course, me and we as the developers having tight communication with people who are actually going to use said systems, and ideally a much larger percentage of the development actually happening in those regions where they're supposed to be used. I mentioned in our call an example that I had heard recently that a very small proportion of climate research funding towards Africa is actually channeled to Africa. So it's sort of people outside Africa that tries to tackle these questions that are relevant for the people of Africa, for example. So I think funders have a huge role here to play to, for example, encourage research consortia that have actors from different regions and so on, for example.
And when we spoke earlier, what you're talking about is that the money goes to development in country, at site. So of course that understanding that capacity building is also part of the process when it comes to applied AI and the modeling that needs to happen. And that's something important to keep in mind when it comes to the communities that we're talking about right now and the work that we want to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Who needs access to this information? In the last minute, I want to go around the room and give you 30 seconds each to ask you, what do you think needs to be the next steps when it comes to AI, specifically with a focus for the water community? And what do we need to do to make this accessible? I'm going to start with Aleksis, Marcus, Jane, I'm going to end with you.
So I think from a research perspective that I'm coming from, I just think in general that more AI researchers should actually do more applied AI research. There's a lot going on in like general AI research, and we hear all the hype about the large language models, which are super cool and useful for many things. But if we can just channel more attention to actually tackling, for example, climate problems, that's a huge step.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what I said earlier. I think we need to create solutions in group, in dialogue. We need to have a broad participation in this. And I think we need to let it take some time. We are right at the beginning of a development that we have no understanding of what will happen just in a few months' time. And lastly, I also need to think that that process needs to be fun. We need to look at this as something engaging. and really, really dig deep in making a process that's inclusive.
Collaboration based on trust, based on openness, based on accountability, and ensuring that there is room for building capacity. We may not know, but we are not at zero. So when the technologies come, we need to use them, but we need to learn how to use them, so that the shift of knowledge and skills is genuinely done, and that will chase away the fear, really, and it will build the trust that this AI is something that we need to embrace and work with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane, Marcus, Aleksis. Please join me in giving them a warm round of applause.